So today the Dow fell as much as 700 points or 2.7%, although it didn't close at that. And it was mostly based on news about the U.S. versus China trade war escalating. No progress on the trade deal that President Trump, Larry Kudlow, Steve Mnuchin, other people in the Trump administration have been promising us every day, Monday through Friday, for over 8 months during stock market open, that there was progress in the trade deal. When in reality, the Chinese were leaking that there was no progress, that things were actually going backwards. And so if you want more in-depth analysis of the U.S. versus China trade war and how I think things can escalate, I did a live stream show last week specifically on that, and I will attach a link at the end of this show, at the end of the video after the show is over, so you can take a look at that. However, I want to read a tweet because I think this is important, and because I think this is very rare that the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, would actually approve of this. So this tweet is from Hu Xijin, Xijin, and he is editor-in-chief of Chinese and English editions of the Global Times. And he has almost 35,000 followers on Twitter, and according to my sources, that the Global Times is a big CCP mouthpiece, that basically everything that they put in that paper and on social media has to be approved by the propaganda department, and it has to be run up the chain. So this guy tweeted out, I'm going to read this tweet. He tweeted out yesterday, a couple days ago actually, because the one he tweeted out earlier today I'll read too. There's two tweets from him. He put another tweet out that's not as important. So he said a couple days ago, he said the sooner new tariffs on $300 billion of Chinese goods come, the better. That means trade war comes to the first turning point, shifting from a comprehensive U.S. offensive to a stalemate. The two sides will then compete on endurance. China's political system will ensure we won't lose. I would say this is hubris. I would say this is projecting strength, artificial strength in public, when in reality, China's economy, and there's a lot of evidence of this, is getting worse. That China's real economy is a paper tiger. Not that the U.S.'s economy is that much better, but China's economy is also doing bad. Things are worsening. Bloomberg just put out a story last week saying China defaults hit record in 2008. 2019 pace is triple that. And I'll attach a link to that story if you want to take a look. The other tweet that he put out today, Hu Xijin put out today, was, and I think this is very interesting because you know what? My educated guesses that I put out last week, it looks like I nailed some of them already. So he is saying that China may stop purchasing U.S. agricultural products and energy. So we thought that this was, I mentioned this as a possibility, but China has to buy soybeans from someone because they have so much pollution. They can't grow all their own food. They have to import soybeans. They have to import, some types of some agricultural products because they can't grow enough of it. So if they're not going to import it from the U.S., so they're going to take a break from soybean farmers, they have to bring it in from somewhere else, maybe Brazil or somewhere else. So he says China may stop purchasing U.S. agricultural products and energy. They've kind of already done that, though. Here's the part where I nailed. He said reduce Boeing orders. So this was probably planned as a strategy. It's interesting that a CCP mouthpiece, part of their propaganda, would leak out reducing Boeing orders, and this was before the Boeing scandal probably. This was probably already planned, so Boeing could be in trouble then even more so. And restrict U.S. service trade with China. So restrict U.S. service trade. That might mean oil service contracts, which is something I made an educated guess on. It could mean maybe IT companies or something along those lines. You'd have to look into that, which companies, and you'd have to go through a more in-depth analysis over which corporations then have large service contracts with Chinese companies. Many Chinese scholars are discussing the possibility of dumping U.S. treasuries and how to do it specifically. So this is a thread about dumping more U.S. treasuries. I mean, China's already been selling a lot of U.S. treasuries, and now the largest holder, China's still, I think, the largest foreign holder of treasuries, but the largest holder of U.S. treasuries total is the U.S. public and pension funds. So that has changed. China used to be the largest holder of treasuries, but over the last 2 years or so, that's changed. So very interesting that we got tweets from this guy about that. I thought it was very interesting, and I'll attach a link to the record defaults. So basically companies defaulted on billions of dollars, almost $6 billion of domestic bonds in the first 4 months of the year, some 3.4 times the total for the same period of 2018, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. So the pace is just enormous, and this has to do with small and medium-sized companies, especially in the private sector, who got too much credit. And that provides some examples of how things are worsening in the Chinese economy, and now this leads me into the main part of the show. So, with the China's economy worsening, with the trade deal escalating, China is projecting strength, as evidenced by those tweets, confidence, hubris, I would say, that they're going to win the trade war. President Trump has hubris that he will win the trade war. Honestly, I don't know if anyone's going to win the trade war. There's going to be so much collateral damage on both sides, whether it's certain Chinese factory owners who are in trouble, or certain sectors in the American economy that have problems. The U.S. consumer is going to be paying a lot of these taxes. So ideally, there's going to be small groups who win in a trade war, but really, truthfully, honestly, if you research the history of trade wars, no one on either side as a whole in general really wins. And despite what one of the commenters in the comment section says, most of these trade wars escalate into real war. There was one commenter who was telling me that the Germany post-World War I economy was doing so well. You haven't really studied history. Japan's economy was doing well prior to World War II. However, after Smoot-Hawley was implemented and there was restrictions on oil and rubber going to Japan from the United States, Japan's economy started to crash. So basically, this show, I want to talk about that my sources, Kyle Bass and other people I've spoken to, are telling me. Kyle Bass did a in-depth interview on Real Vision Television a month or two ago. This was his last one. And he was outlining how a lot of the sources he's spoken to inside China and Hong Kong have told him that even all the way up to the top of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP elites, and the richest businessmen in China were getting worried about China's economy and were worried also about how the trade war would escalate. And so in public, the CCP is to save face, is promoting strength. When in reality, they're worried about the economy, they're worried about potential problems with their currency and other problems that could happen. And so the people at the top in China, and this trickles down too, are now getting into Bitcoin again. And if you look at the price charts of Bitcoin, Bitcoin has more than doubled now since mid-February. So in only a couple months, Bitcoin now is up to, let me pull up the chart real quick. Bitcoin is up to almost $8,000 already. So it was languishing around $3,000 when Brian Kelly of CNBC was lying about his short position and all this stuff, and Wall Street was giving up. And here you have a situation now where it seems that a lot of people in China, all the way up to the top, in the middle, and at the bottom now, and people are like, oh, Jason, China has a firewall. It's illegal to buy Bitcoin in China. Well, a lot of people can use a VPN. So if you have a VPN in China, you can use YouTube, you can use Netflix, you can use these things. So I would imagine that if you do have a VPN inside China, you would be able to go to a Japanese or South Korean cryptocurrency exchange and then go ahead and buy Bitcoin. So a lot of people now are buying Bitcoin. And this is not, I need to point this out, this is not fundamentally driven in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not rising because of fundamentals. Bitcoin is rising because of liquidity increases and flight capital. And it is starting in China, in my opinion, based on the sources I've talked to. And now you have the Wall Street people, the momentum guys, the trend traders, some of these hedge funds that are involved in the Bitcoin market. And now they are starting to piggyback and get in that trade again because Bitcoin is starting to break through some of those old overhead resistance levels. And Bitcoin is now back to almost 60% dominance relative to the other cryptocurrencies, whereas in January 2018, let me pull up the chart again to confirm this. January 2018, at the beginning of January 2018, the Bitcoin dominance got as low as just below 33%. So Bitcoin now, it seems to me that the elite money in China that is worried about things in China, worried about the U.S. versus China trade war, escalating problems in China. Maybe China's going to do a currency devaluation. in the not too distant future, even though Kyle Bass says that China is using their reserves to maintain the peg and keep the exchange rate and keep their currency overvalued. But maybe people in China on the inside are worried about a devaluation and more inflation coming and other problems. So I like I said, I do like Bitcoin. I do not advocate putting all your money into it. I do not advocate putting all your money into gold and silver. However, for diversification purposes, if you want to speculate on some Bitcoin, maybe a couple other cryptos, it's okay. I know a lot of listeners that have made a lot of money in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies over the years. The thing is their volatility. So I will stress that, in my opinion, based on the sources I've spoken to, the research I have done, Bitcoin is not rising on fundamentals. It is rising on liquidity moving, global macro liquidity. A lot of it's out of China, because from what I've heard, that CCP elites have told people that, because obviously if you're like running the Chinese Communist Party, you might not be super tech savvy and you don't know how to buy crypto. So they probably told like either one of their employees or one of their relatives to do the research and go and buy them. Here's some RMB that was just printed, aka stolen from the People's Bank of China. Because from what I've heard, the elites have been laundering many billions of dollars per month extra for themselves out of China, either getting it into dollars or euros. But China has very strict capital controls, and there's always been ways around it in the past. But it seems that the capital controls crackdown, according to Kyle Bass, has gotten worse in the last 12 months. And now Bitcoin is one of the preferred ways to get laundered money out of China. And professional managed money, a lot of professional managed money is still not allowed to buy Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies yet. There's some of that stuff set up at the institutional level, smaller funds. I don't know if they're $1 billion yet. I know Mark, the technology guy, I forgot his, Andreessen, there we go. Mark Andreessen and Mark Yusko and some of those other guys have Bitcoin investment funds set up, or a Bitcoin index fund or crypto index fund set up for institutions. But for most professional money managers, if you buy stocks and bonds and other investments, you're really not allowed to diversify into Bitcoin yet. You have to get your bylaws changed, or you have to open up a separate fund. So it's not professional managed money necessarily, like large amounts of institutional money into Bitcoin yet. It's mostly the hedge funds and the trend traders that are piggybacking now. But I believe, in my opinion, that a lot of this momentum started due to liquidity and flight capital. And I would warn you guys, there's been studies coming out in the last 2 months, and this is from Bitwise. There's a couple articles I can attach if you want to take a look at it. One of them's from Forbes, and basically this company called Bitwise Asset Management, they did a report, and they said that a lot of Bitcoin exchanges and cryptocurrency exchanges, that some of the volume on the exchanges is totally fake. So it's all like spoofing and market manipulation and wash trading. It's not every single Bitcoin or crypto exchange, but they said a lot of the smaller exchanges fake their volume. So Bitcoin, just in the last 24 hours, has had $86 billion, almost $87 billion in volume. It's had a lot of volume back and forth. It's had a lot of trading volume. So its popularity is picking up. Now, this is not financial advice to go out on Bitcoin, but if you do want to speculate in it, it looks to me like if things are getting worse in China, and China's projecting that they're going to win this trade war, that in reality things are going to get worse in China for a lot of people. And while the CCP elites are telling, they're telling their mainstream media over in China that, we're going to say that we're going to win this trade war and that we have the right political system to win this trade war, in reality what they're doing with their own money, rather than just talk, what they're doing with their actions is they're telling people to as insurance to get money out of RMB and to buy Bitcoin and buy gold. Gold price moved up a little bit. Buy real estate. I hear real estate getting money out of the country in China to go buy real estate in other areas. Maybe not Vancouver anymore, but getting buying real estate in other areas is still popular as well. Okay, let me check my notes and make sure I covered a lot of the stuff. So I think Bitcoin, if you're going to be diversified, if you own some real estate, some rental properties, physical gold, this is not financial advice, just my opinion. So if you have the money to do so and you own rental properties and you own physical gold and silver and you own maybe some good gold and silver companies like Franco-Nevada, Sandstorm Gold, some of those, right? Wheaton Precious Metals, Royal Gold, Osisko, maybe a handful of other select miners, because in general the miners are bad. I don't think you'd go wrong if you had a Bitcoin speculation thing. Bitcoin speculation position. If you don't know what you're doing and you have too much speculation in Bitcoin, bad things can happen. And I don't think Bitcoin necessarily is an investment. I think it's a good speculation, though. The one thing that worries me is if Bitcoin price increases a lot and it goes high enough that these governments will change the rules and they will do what a lot of gold bugs and silver bugs are worried about and implement another windfall profits tax like what the U.S. Congress tried to do in oil. And the response when I try to argue politely with Bitcoin bulls about this is they tell me, oh, I'll just take all my Bitcoin profits and I'll just leave the country. It's like, okay, so I hope you have a second or third passport and I hope you have all this planned out. Because if you're just going to take your Bitcoin profits and run, you're going to be a marked man. You might not be able to come back into your home country. And some people, that's okay, but other people, it's not. So a lot of Bitcoin people, when they tell me, oh, I have all these Bitcoin profits, and if my home country tries to increase windfall profits tax 70, 80, 90% on my Bitcoin gains if Bitcoin goes insanely high, or tries to make me sell my Bitcoin, in addition to windfall profits taxes, they just tell me they'll leave and go to another country. So if you do have that and that's your plan, I would tell you then you probably need a second or third passport and you probably need an exit strategy to leave your country and start over. Okay, another interesting thing that another longtime listener brought up on my Twitter about this was he was asking why U.S. bureaucrats, regulators, and basically the monetary authorities, the FBI, those types would allow Chinese money laundering into the U.S. with Bitcoin, either out of RMB into Bitcoin, then maybe sell it after Bitcoin goes up into dollars or something like that. And then, they've laundered the money, and how are they able to do this? And I would say that a lot of these bureaucrats and politicians, they don't really care, okay? As long as the money is used to buy, and this happened in Vancouver, and this happens elsewhere too, but Vancouver is one of the worst examples of this, where Vancouver politicians and Vancouver bureaucrats and stuff, the people involved in regulating capital flows into Vancouver, they knew for over a decade. It was more like, from what I've heard from my friends in Vancouver, like the last 25 years, give or take, that there's been a ton of drug cartel and Chinese money that has been laundered into Vancouver and parked in Vancouver real estate. And only in the last couple years have the Vancouver citizens started bitching and complaining enough to where the politicians now are starting to act. So if you don't know, unfortunately, a lot of regulators and bureaucrats, there's always the excuse that they don't have enough time, money, or resources. It's just the blanket excuses. Those are the three main excuses, unfortunately. Those are always the main excuses. And unfortunately, those excuses cover up a lot of laziness, a lot of ineptitude, and a lot of corruption. It's not always corruption, but there are examples of this. And unfortunately, it's even in Bitcoin. When Bitcoin was just getting going, we had the Silk Road stuff, right? And whether you believe or not that Ross Ulbricht is Dread Pirate Roberts, he didn't commit any violent crimes, okay? If you follow the case and what his mom has revealed and what he was done to him, he was not given any discovery process at his trial. He was tortured with sleep deprivation for weeks prior to his trial. He wasn't shown any evidence. He was totally railroaded. And I think he has over 2 life sentences for starting the Silk Road. And yet it did nothing because look at all the copycats of the Silk Road afterwards, right? There's over a dozen now. And on top of this, there was 2 FBI agents that were stealing the Bitcoins while the investigation was ongoing. And if you believe Ross Ulbricht, and I don't think he even got a chance to present this evidence at trial, they were blackmailing him. And Ross Ulbricht said that he was out of the Silk Road long before a lot of the really, really bad crime started. And I don't think he was even allowed to present this theory with evidence at trial, that he said that it was Mark Karpeles who was involved, and Karpeles was the real Dread Pirate Roberts doing all this crazy stuff. So it's a mess. And the other example of money laundering, and this, most people don't know about this, Catherine Austin Fitts talks about this, that at the height of the 2008 financial crisis, things were so bad that the U.S. federal government allowed drug cartels to come in, and it was like a one-time deal, and at the many billions of dollars, either billions or tens of billion dollar level, come in, organized crime and drug cartels come in and legally launder all their dollars into the treasury market to support the treasury market and the dollar. Okay, so she talks about this in her red button speech, and the corruption and the crime. This is her red button speech, if you want to go look it up. So the bottom line, I forget the guy's name who asked the question, but most of the regulators, the bureaucrats, they like going after the little guy because the little guy can't afford lawyers. So our justice system is mostly an injustice system at this point. Unless you have a certain amount of money, or you know the right people politically, you're not going to get the justice that you deserve. And that's probably, there's stories even around town here, around where I live, about like dry cleaners and other businesses, and they keep changing hands with Chinese families and they don't make any money. And every year or two, like a new Chinese family comes in and gets their visa and pays like $500,000 or $1 million, whatever the minimum is to buy your U.S. citizenship. And they come in here, pay for a losing business that doesn't make any money, get their citizenship or green cards, and then I don't know what happens after them, because a couple years later the business is just totally mismanaged and then it just changes hands again. This has been going on at a handful of dry cleaners locally in the area I live. There's at least like 5 or 6 of these Chinese dry cleaners that this has been happening for a decade. And I don't know if the regulators have visited them. It just doesn't make a bunch of sense to me. So I don't think we should expect the bureaucrats, the regulators, to crack down on the Chinese money laundering, especially if they're buying real estate and it's going to. So there were some arguments back and forth about property taxes in the area I'm in. When an old house is knocked down and a new house is built, that increases the property value around it of all the other houses, and especially if there's more than one house that's knocked down and a new house is built, and that raises property taxes around. So different states and different municipalities and counties will do things differently, but that's how things are around here. And in general, I would say that most governments at the state and local level in the U.S., they want property taxes at a certain level and not to drop, and they want them to increase. And if someone, a foreigner, is willing to come in and pay ludicrous prices for real estate, I think a lot of government bureaucrats or employees would be okay with that, as long as it meant a good amount of property taxes, and property taxes were not falling, and even, which would be beneficial for them, property taxes increasing. So I'll take a look at listener questions and comments. This is not going to be a super long show. The VIX is back up to over 20 at 20.55. So the leverage short volatility trade is not doing well today. They're not going to give up, though, especially if the plunge protection team and the central banks are involved in that. But looks like people who traded that today, they got a big 28% spike. The dollar index is holding around 97. It hasn't done very much in a while. It's been range bound. So it looks like the dollar index, they don't want it much higher than 98 or 99, at least for now. So it looks like it's going to be range bound for a while. I'll let you know if I change my mind about that. Scott says, trust me, we will win this war. Who will win the trade war? Look, Scott, if a lot of factories come back, the most of them, like I said, are going to be automated. So I would be investing in robotics. I would look for the companies that make the robotics. And this is not financial advice, just my opinion. So I would look for some of these companies that could be a pure play on factory robots. Unfortunately, you have companies like Amazon and others that have been buying these up. Amazon in like 2013 grossly overpaid for Kiva systems. They didn't have that much revenue and they only had 1 or 2 customers and they weren't profitable. And Amazon, most people thought they were only worth about $50 million, and Amazon paid $700 million for that company back then. So maybe it's a good deal now, but at the time, a lot of people were criticizing them that they overpaid, but they integrated robotics into their warehouses. And another company I brought up a while ago called Adept, they were bought out in 2013. That stock had a really good customer list, good revenue. They weren't consistently profitable, but they were close. And those shares went from $3 a share. They were a pure play on manufacturing robots, and those shares went from $3 to almost $16 before they got bought. So a lot of humans are not in this trade war. A lot of humans are not going to get a bunch of jobs. It's going to be automation. Now, corporations moving factories back, that will increase tax revenues to the U.S. That will make the fake GDP numbers look better. But it's not going to bring back a lot of human jobs, especially when you have politicians like Bernie Sanders and so many others, even Tulsi Gabbard, who's anti-war, but Tulsi's economics are garbage. And you have these politicians demanding higher and higher wages with artificially manipulated interest rates, and politicians demanding higher wages, and workers wanting, better health care included, and workers wanting, days off and all these other perks and salary increases, better breaks, maternity leave. If a employer can, they're going to automate. It just makes more sense if you're running a business or a manager. Well, I've heard, Alex says gold and silver not moving much. So I've heard the Chinese are buying more physical gold and silver, but the paper market is so manipulated. I may write an article about how there's a war on two fronts. May write it for GATA. I've been thinking about writing one. About how there's the paper price manipulation, and then how with the higher base metals price with copper, lead, and zinc, that's keeping on a lot of extra silver. Okay, I'm looking at listener questions. Alex says, good point about the stuff I'm saying. Bitcoin, though, seems to have a big usefulness implementation problem, like when will I be able to buy food with Bitcoin? So there's an intermediary necessary. There's a couple other websites and apps that you have to use where you open up the app and then you move your Bitcoin there. You put Bitcoin, I think, in your account, and then it buys you groceries or has them delivered. So we're not at that point yet. I think some of these I know Whole Foods is starting to take Bitcoin. I think I just heard that. I think that's in the last couple weeks. So some of these corporations now are starting to take Bitcoin. I know they're testing it out. I know there's a lot of corporations that are testing it, but a lot of them haven't switched it on yet. Who will fare the worst as the trade war rages on? So without bailouts, the Chinese factory owners would be bankrupt already. So they're going to have to be, they're already getting bailouts. I reported on that from a source. I think the bailouts are only going to increase. So certain Chinese factory owners are going to be in trouble. There's going to be certain consumers where their costs are going to rise. And there's going to be certain people in certain industries that are going to have either factories closed or contracts canceled with Chinese companies. And this is a speculative idea and it's not financial advice, but if you're a very aggressive trader and you want to take some risk, I would, in addition to maybe speculating a little bit on some Bitcoin, I would also look at maybe buying some call options or leaps on Overstock. Overstock has a large Bitcoin crypto exposure with Medici Ventures and T0. So Overstock tends to act as a proxy for the Wall Street traders who are too lazy to actually go and buy crypto and trade crypto. So what they do instead, these Wall Street guys who either are not allowed to buy cryptocurrency with managed money, or they're too lazy to do it themselves for their customers or on their own own accounts, is they just use Overstock as a proxy. So if I'm right and Bitcoin does go up a lot as the trade war escalates, and I think we could see, and again, this is not fundamentally driven. This is liquidity and flight capital. This is money in China wanting to get out of RMB for whatever reason. Because in public, this money is saying that China's going to win the trade war. China's strong. Our economy's strong. But in private, they're doing the opposite. Samuel says, Gerald Salenti says there is no trade war. My response, there's been a trade war for a long time. There's been a trade war that the U.S. didn't even realize for over 25 years. As soon as China joined the World Trade Organization, it basically started. So since like late 90s, 2001-ish. And look, there is no free trade. There's very little free markets. Okay, there's no beneficial deflation for the most part for the U.S. consumer anymore. And Samuel, I would not listen to Gerald Salenti for any economic or financial or trading advice. He is solely geopolitical. And I know people that traded on stuff he wrote in his newsletter on his interviews, and they lost almost all their money in only like 5 or 6 years. So I would be very careful about listening to any economic or political advice. He's like one of those, he's changed his tune, I think, lately. I don't listen to many of his interviews anymore. But the last couple ones I did, he's been a lot more cautious, and he's been talking about buying rental properties and a little bit of gold and stuff like that. He's been a lot more careful about his words, but he kind of fits in that narrative with the alternative media and with the gold and silver community, like the pumpers, that, gold was going to go through the roof. There is a lot of demand for physical gold. The price just hasn't moved. But the miners are in trouble. Most of the miners. Especially the silver miners. The gold miners have better margins right now than the silver miners. It's substantially better. Yeah, so I've been talking, if you're wondering, I've been talking for years now that I think two of the best long-term technology trends are cybersecurity and robotics and automation. The problem is valuations for cybersecurity. There are very few cybersecurity companies at reasonable valuations. The valuations are always ridiculously high. So I'm always looking for undervalued growth or reasonable growth prices, paying a reasonable valuation for growth. And in cybersecurity, you almost never have that. Almost never. And robotics, it is very difficult to find a pure play in robotics, especially like some of these warehouse robots. There's just very few. Either the big technology companies own these robot plays, so like Google or SoftBank or some of these others own these robot companies, or the robot division is from a company like ABB, which you saw that warehouse robot, the manufacturing robot in Iron Man with Tony Stark, the funny robot that always made the mistakes. And unfortunately, I think that's only about 30% of revenues total for ABB. So you're not getting a pure play. You're not getting that pure robotics exposure, which is what you want. You want that pure robotics exposure with a good customer base. And this is why Adept was a good speculation 5 to 7 years ago, because they were featured in a 60 Minutes documentary. When you look through their investors' presentation, they weren't profitable yet, but their customer list was like Johnson & Johnson, Gillette. They had like a really good customer list. Okay, so they were making revenue. They had all these good customers. So you could see the potential of the company, and that if management improved things and became more efficient, that this was going to be a really good, profitable company. Now, unfortunately, the company was bought out at about 5 times. The stock went up about 5-fold, and it was bought out before they could become profitable and pay dividends and things like that. Well, I called Tilray. So I did the research on Tilray. I actually went through the annual report, member, in August 2018. See, this is why I do the podcast. Not all my predictions are right, but I've been getting better at this over the years. I had to block some douche nozzle because he was bringing up some stuff in 2009. I was like, dude, I've read like 400 books since then. I've interviewed hundreds of more experts. You don't think I've gotten better? You don't think I've changed my views? I was a hyperinflationist back then. I'm more of a... They're going to keep... The people in power, the economic and political elites are going to keep things in stagflation as long as they can. It's going to be stagflate and tax and lie. They're going to underreport the inflation. They're going to lie about the economic data. And they're going to keep things in stagflation. He's like, but if there was inflation, interest rates should go higher. Oh, really? Do you think the U.S. government's going to allow interest rates to go higher on treasuries? Do you think they're not going to manipulate it? So the thing with Tilray, though, just went off on a rant there. The thing about Tilray, though, is it took time for that to play out. And most people, if you're a professional money manager, you don't have time. You have to produce results. But if you're a retail investor, you can be patient. Most professionally managed money, there's too much pressure. So Tilray, you couldn't go short on that thing immediately. You had to wait. Because there was just, there was too much bullishness, there was too much momentum in Tilray, and they beat on revenues, even though the underlying parts of the company were garbage. And I said this in August 2018, you can go look up the Tilray episode. And I was like, they've increased revenue a lot. Every time they increase revenue, their costs go up even faster. And apparently, for a while, no one cared. Stock still went up. Stock didn't crash, but it eventually crashed. And then management got out. They liquidated. They got out as much shares and stock options as they could before the thing was in trouble. Keynesian economics is not bailouts. That's a misinforming half-truth. Okay, so Keynesian economics, in theory, is supposed to have a budget surplus. That's in theory. It's supposed to have a surplus when the business cycle goes bad. But you know what? Please tell me a real-world example where any politician has carried a budget surplus. So there's theory, Tim, versus reality. Okay? In reality, the way Keynesian economics has been used, it's not a half-truth. Keynesian economics in reality, not in theory, is bailouts. Oh, this is getting too political for me. Matt asks, what's the best rare earths play in Canada, US, or is there none? So Molycorp went bankrupt, and I believe that's a private equity company right now. There's Linus in Australia. Linus might be the only one. They were profitable a couple years ago. I haven't looked at them recently. Linus has revenue. Linus doesn't have heavy rare earths, though, and they don't do all the value chain. So I think they only make rare earth oxides. They don't do anything else in the value chain. So China still has basically a monopoly on the heavy rare earths right now. There's a lot of rare earths. The problem is they're not in economic concentrations all over the globe. The other problem is that the most in-demand parts of the rare earths are the heavy rare earths, like dysprosium and some of the others. And China basically has a monopoly on those supply because they bankrupted all the other rare earths companies because China cut so many corners on the environment with the air, water, and soil at the mines. And China has mostly very close to a full monopoly. There is some processing in Japan. There's some processing in Europe. It's a tiny amount. There was one more rare earths processing in the value chain in Canada. They were on an exchange years ago. I forgot the name. Molycorp bought them, And then the vertical integration strategy didn't work because they couldn't get the mine profitable and they had too much debt. Their balance sheet was a mess. So on paper, the business plan for Molycorp looked good years ago, but as I said many years ago, their execution was just absolutely horrible. And the execution was the balance sheet was so leveraged with debt that it just wasn't going to work. So Linus would be the only miner right now, I think, that's generating any revenues, and I think there's protests, unfortunately, for Linus. So I don't even think Linus is safe. LYNAS in Australia. So I would monitor the situation. Again, not financial advice, just my opinion, but I don't think Linus is safe right now because the last time I saw Linus, there was big protests over one of their rare earth processing facilities. Might have been in Malaysia. Are you talking about Yamana Gold, Rude Dog? The rumor, this is just a rumor. The rumor is Yamana Gold's up for sale. The rumor is Yamana Gold's up for sale. The market really hated how Yamana Gold was telling people for the last couple of years that the Chapada mine was their cornerstone asset with their best margins, most free cash flow. And then Yamana Gold, without any warning, sold the asset for $1 billion in cash to try to fix their balance sheet and increase the dividend. And the market did not like this. They do not trust management. But the rumor is Yamana Gold's up for sale. And a lot of people expect it to be sold in the next 6 months. The rumor is buyout. I don't know if this is not financial advice. I don't know if I would speculate on that. They do have some good assets, but I don't know what the premium would be on a buyout. But the rumor is the company is up for sale, that the management team has given up. And if Yamana Gold were to be bought by, say, a larger gold miner, then that would help Sandstorm Gold even more with Agua Rica, which is not in the cash flow projections. Agua Rica could be another big home run for Sandstorm Gold. Okay, looking at more listener questions and comments. Hi, Jesse. Good to see you. I started this a couple hours late. I went to the gym first. I wasn't feeling too good. I got a workout in. I feel better now. Universal Vibes TV says, well, there's the answer as to how Bitcoin will react in an economic crisis. Yeah, so Bitcoin it looks like Bitcoin, based on some of these studies by Bitwise and others, a lot of the volume manipulation, if these reports are true, about 95% of reported Bitcoin trading volume is fake on some exchanges, is being used for wash trading and spoofing to actually raise the price. Maybe sometimes when Bitcoin's in a downtrend and then it breaks below support levels, maybe that manipulation and fake volume with spoofing and other tricks that the high-frequency traders use reverses, but it looks like now that part of that is being used to manipulate the price higher. In addition to the Chinese money leaving China. Scott, I think the only win the U.S. is going to claim is if corporations move back here and there's more automated factories. That means more tax revenues at the federal, state, and local level, but there will not be that many human jobs. Okay, why are all these people commenting in the comment section about this porn website being down? Guys, come on. Be adults. At least keep your porn to yourself. Be quiet. Keep it discreet, dude. You don't have to brag about your porn usage on a live chat. John Doe says porn is key to the economy. Yeah, so is prostitution now, apparently. In the European Union, they added it to GDP. I think it increased GDP by over 20%. There is another interesting spec play. Hive blockchain technology, they may actually benefit from a higher Bitcoin and Ethereum price because they have been with Frank Giustra's money and Frank Holmes running it. They say they have good margins. So I haven't looked at the company in about 8 months or a year, but on paper it looked like they were going to scale up and be profitable mining these cryptos. That would be this is not financial advice, just my opinion. That would be very, very speculative for Hive blockchain. So there is some risk out there besides just buying crypto is risky, but there is additional risk if you want to take with maybe options on overstock or buying high blockchain technology. Those would be additional plays. And the Wall Street guys, some of these hedge fund managers and Wall Street traders who can't buy crypto, they may just buy proxies like the two companies I just mentioned. I don't know, hey Ronnie, I don't know a lot of the altcoins. I don't spend time on those things. I honestly would just rather look for growth companies and cover the global macro economy. But the sources I'm talking to, and I'm becoming friends with one of Kyle Bass's employees, and it sounds like, you know, things beneath the surface. There's a lot of CCP money and rich Chinese businessmen who are having trouble getting their money out of China when in the past it was pretty easy compared to now. And it looks like crypto is one of those new avenues to get their money out. Okay, guys, well, we're at 45 minutes right now. There's a lot of questions and comments coming in, so this is longer than I wanted to keep things at. I will answer the questions and comments. I will try to after the show is over. I try to read a lot of them below every single video. One of my listeners, I don't know what was wrong with this guy. He said he's a longtime listener and likes my content, and then he started yelling at me for not putting all this content, not taking the time to put all this content in iTunes. And he said instead of commenting below when the videos are done and commenting to people's comments or questions, answering those things, I should instead just put things on iTunes. So I should take more time out of my everyday life to do more free work for him. You know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I can guarantee you he was not a Patreon contributor because of the way he was talking to me, because you know what? My Patreon contributors don't complain. They're very respectful. And of course, because he was bitching and complaining at me and I was just fed up with it, I just blocked him. I'm tired of doing this. Spent a lot of time, got you the guys the information. So bottom line, Bitcoin, not fundamentally driven. This is all about capital flows, liquidity, and flight capital out of China. Okay, that's it for today's show. I will do another show if I see anything interesting as far as current events go. And the articles I cited will be in the information section after the video is over. Okay, bye.